Hi, and welcome to another edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus. This video is a revision of a video from a few weeks ago entitled, What Gives Better Results, Slide Film or Digital? First, I want to give you a very brief description of that first video, but I advise you to take a look at that video before going too far into this one. I think it will make more sense. But so I put a link to that video in the description below. And I'm going to refer to my notes here, and I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. So in that video, I showed three versions of similar images. Okay, two of them were shot on Ektachrome 100 with my Nikon F2 and a 55mm lens. One of those images was a lab scan. The lab that processed the film did a scan, high-resolution scan. The second version was that same image that I digitized using my Nikon ES2 digitizer, and the third image was shot on my Nikon Z8 with standard picture control. And my conclusion in that video was that the digital image was superior. The way I evaluated these images was for sharpness, color accuracy, and both highlight and shadow detail. And I felt that in those categories that the digital image was superior. So I've rethought my conclusion based on the many comments I received. And I'm going to give you a quick summary of those comments. I responded to a good number of them, but I got a lot of them, and then people would comment on a comment, and sometimes I would miss them. So I went back and I looked through all the comments, and I picked out some that I think were gave a good picture of the comments. And I also want to thank everyone who commented. You know, I always ask for comments on my videos, and I always say I will try to respond to all comments and questions. And, you know, whether you agree with my conclusions or disagree, I'd like to hear from everyone. I think it's good to get other opinions, and sometimes you will change your mind when someone may show you something you missed. So I brought these comments down into three categories. I broke them down into three categories. Those who thought the slide film images were better, those who thought my testing was flawed, and those who agreed with me and thought digital was better. Now, the most responses were for slide film being better. The second most was the testing was flawed, and the least number of comments were that my conclusions were correct. So I'm just going to go through some of these and give a brief comment on each, and then what I have done, I have, like I said, I reevaluated these images, and I went back. I did nothing with the lab scan. In fact, theirs were so bad, I think we're just going to see one of them. And I went back and I showed my original ES2 conversion along with my original image from the digital camera from the Nikon Z8. And then finally, I went back into Lightroom, and the raw image from the Z8, I went over it again and made some changes, used a different picture control, and we'll get to that when we look at the images in a few minutes. But I just want to go through some of these comments and comment on them. I think it's good for everyone to hear this. You know, I think this has been a really good conversation. It's something that has been coming up for years, and let's get into it. Okay, so let me go through these comments. First comment I have made a note of here is 35mm is not a fair comparison. You should compare to medium format. Well, the Z8 sensor is the same size as a piece of 35mm film, so I feel it is a fair comparison. However, I know when the D800 came out, I read some reviews, DP Review in particular, and they said those images compared favorably to medium format film. So, you know, that's how I feel about that. Here's one. ES2 scans look best in terms of color. Slide images look more natural, but is it worth the cost and inconvenience? It's a personal decision. Now, I agree with that. Is it really worth the cost and inconvenience? Well, let's go through this and we will see. Your digital images have more shadow detail, but the ES2 scans have more charm and a finished look. I don't know if I agree with that one, but again, that's someone's opinion, and I value their opinion. ES2 far more appealing. The Z6 and Z8 so flat that they are boring. And I will agree that at least one of those Z8 images was flat. I even noted that in my original video, but like I said, I reconverted that in Lightroom, and we'll take a look at that shortly. Okay, here's another comment. A good comparison would have been to project both slide and digital side by side. Well, I do have a slide projector, no longer have a screen. I don't have a digital projector, but how would I have shown that on YouTube? I could have filmed both images projected on the wall. I don't think that would have been valid, but I do think, and I've always felt this way, that the best way to view color photography was through projection of a slide. And also someone said slides were meant to be projected. And that is true to a certain extent, but National Geographic, Life magazine, I'm sure Look magazine, lots of publications that were using color wanted you to submit color slides. So for years, color slides were the medium of choice for reproduction in color magazines. Kodachrome came out in 1935 or 1936, and it was the standard for color reproduction in magazines. So true, slides are meant for production, but they're also meant for high quality color reproduction in publications. I know that National Geographic at least now uses digital. I don't know if you can still submit slides. I would think so. All right, a few more. ES2 photos show more character, contrast, and detail. Definitely more contrast. I think when you copy a slide, when you digitize it, you can gain contrast. Beautiful colors and 3D rendering versus pixel peeping and flat rendering. I don't need to comment on that. And here's one I think was really well thought out, and I'm just going to refer to, this was a recent comment. One gentleman stated, better, define better. And then I did respond to him, and I said what I said earlier in this video, that I was looking at better in terms of shadow detail, highlight detail, color reproduction, and so forth. And he also went on to say that Arthur Rubinstein, when told he was the greatest pianist, his response, he got angry at that, and he said there isn't such a thing as the greatest pianist. Nothing in art can be the best, only different. And I agree strongly with that comment. We all try to pick a list of the greatest guitarist or the greatest album or the greatest singer or the greatest movie. And it's all up to your personal opinion. I don't think there is any greatest, although it seems anytime there's a list of the greatest guitar player, it always seems to be Jimi Hendrix. I prefer Duane Allman. Okay, just a side note there. I still like film, but ultimately converted my final result into a digital product. So why bother? But when you factor in the cost, Why should I continue to shoot film? I really agree with that point. Too many variables in my testing that influence the results, and I agree with that. There were a lot of variables there. I could have used the same lens on both cameras. I mean, there's a whole list of things. Another one who said compare and projection. I like digital because of convenience factor, shoot and send it off and make prints the same day. I do miss Kodachrome. And someone else said that it's not a valid test because I didn't compare it to Kodachrome. Well, I really can't compare it to Kodachrome, unfortunately, and I agree Kodachrome was an excellent film, and so is Fujichrome Velvia. However, I wanted to do this test with Velvia. I could not find any Velvia. On B&H website, it states that it's temporarily out of stock, but it's been temporarily out of stock for months. It's fun to shoot 4x5, not machine gunning and downloading and never seeing the images again. Well, I try not to machine gun, except maybe if I'm trying to shoot birds in flight. I imagine 4x5 would be better than most digital today, but it is very inconvenient to shoot. But if that's what you enjoy, if you're a landscape photographer or an architectural photographer, product photographer, where 4x5 with the movements would really come in and help get a better image, go for it. Digital is technically superior. I think digital is very dependent on editing. You can use a digital camera like a film camera and think before you make the image. That's very true. I do agree that it is dependent on editing. That's why I went back and re-edited a few of these pictures. And the person is right. You can use a digital camera like a film camera. Limit yourself to, let's say, 36 shots. So you will think more. You will take your time more. You will concentrate on each image. But once you have that digital, it's pretty hard to do. So I like to shoot variations of the same image. The color and saturation of the slides are amazing. And they are when viewed through projection or on a light table. Now, another thing, years ago I used to print Cibachrome. Cibachrome prints was a direct process from slides. It was absolutely beautiful. That's no longer available. I feel that photos on slide film look more realistic and three-dimensional than digital that never look natural. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I get the point. I heard many photographers argue this point, and it looks as though digital comes out on top. Okay, so why don't we go look at some images, and I will then give you my revised conclusion, and I would love to hear your comments on this. What do you think of these revised images? And again, if you like them, great. If you don't, please let me know that. And so let's go take a look at those pictures. All right, this first set is from the first video. So on the left, we have the lab scan, which looks totally off. In the center, we have the ES2, and on the right, we have the Z8. And I feel the Z8 image is closer to reality. I feel the ES2 is too magenta and too contrasty. If you look at the tree on the upper left of the ES2 image, it just doesn't look real to me. But again, that's my opinion. I think if you saw the ES2 image without seeing the Z8 image, you might think it's fine. But also the shadow detail on the face of the statue, I feel, is much better in the Z8. So it really didn't change my mind here. Now, this one here, what I did, I have the original lab scan, and then the ES2 revised it a little bit. I got rid of some of that magenta, and I personally think it looks better, a little closer to reality. And then I revise the Z8 image, and I prefer that one. Now, here we have the church, all right? The upper one is the ES2. I didn't even include the lab scan. It was so far off. That's the first image, the first raw conversion from the Z8 on the upper right. And on the bottom, I went to a different picture control. I went to landscape picture control, increased the contrast, played around with the color a little bit. And I think that is the most natural of the images. However, when I looked at the slides, and I didn't do this originally, I did compare the slide to the lab scan, but when I looked at the slide with a loupe on a light box, I feel that is probably the best image. It's got a little more contrast than my Z8 second version, and the color looks very good. Now, I feel that the ES2 scan is too contrasty, and to me, it's unrealistic. Again, however, if you just saw that by itself, fine. But in the slide, there is more detail in the left side of the image where the sun is hitting the building. And as far as detail, it is very close to the Z8 second image. Now, I prefer that Z8 second image. Some of you may disagree, and that's fine. But I think the slide itself, viewed on the light table with a loupe, looks the best. But again, to use it anywhere, to have a print made, to publish it, we need to have it digitized. And that's where the problem is, I believe. Now, this image here, I agreed initially that the Z8 image, the first image you see on the left, is flat. It was flat. The middle images from the ES2, I didn't do anything to that this time. And on the right is the same Z8 image, but I went to a landscape picture control, did some other changes to it, and in my view, that looks the best. Now, the middle image from the ES2, I think is fine if I didn't see that Z8 image, because there's more detail in both the shadows and in the highlights. And I think the sky color is a little closer to reality. Okay, so what did you think of the revised Z8 images as compared to the original ES2 images, and even the one of the statue that I kind of did a little color correction on the ES2? In my opinion, I still prefer the Z8 images, the revised ones, actually. Slides, if they were projected, I would have to agree that they probably would look better. They look better on the light table with a loupe. So I imagine projected, they'll look even better. I don't think it's a big difference between the slide and the revised Z8 images. I think they're very close. The problem comes when you need to digitize that slide. And if we're going to use those slides today, unless we're going to send them off to National Geographic to be published, I think we're going to lose quality when we scan them. Now, maybe a better scan, probably, and I shouldn't say maybe, a better scan would capture more of what's in that slide. However, the disadvantage of the slide is if you lose highlight detail, and we always would underexpose a little. When I shot slides, I would always underexpose a little so as not to lose highlight detail. Of course, when you do that, you tend to lose shadow detail. So you are going to have a better tonal range in a digital image. Plus, once that image is captured in RAW, you can go in and improve the highlights, improve the shadows, change the color, increase contrast, and so forth and so on. There is so much you can do with a digital image that you can't do with a slide. With a slide, you got to get it right. You got to nail your exposure, and if it's a very contrasty situation, it's going to be difficult to capture a wide range from highlight to shadow. But they have their place. Again, projected, they look great. I think you're going to get a higher percentage of better exposed, in-focus images with a digital camera today. They're so sophisticated. You have so many options. I think you're just going to do better with the digital camera. Black and white, I still like film. I don't know if I like it better. I definitely like a black and white traditional darkroom print however, over an inkjet print. So my conclusion is digital. Your conclusion may be different, and that's fine. But also, the cost, I just don't think it's worth it. Not just the cost, the time too involved. And you need to send your film off. You know, if you're lucky, you have a lab close to home that you could take the film to and maybe pick it up the next day. But digital, you come back from your shoot and there's your images. You play around with them a little bit in Lightroom or other converter that you may prefer, and you could send them off to your client if you're a professional, to show your family and friends on Facebook if you're an amateur, you know, whatever you choose to do. So I strongly prefer digital. I said in the previous video, I had one roll of an additional roll of Kodachrome, of Ektachrome, and I will shoot that, but that will be it. I have no intention of shooting any more slide film unless I could get my hands on some Velvia. I would like to compare that to the Z8 images. So please leave your comments in the comments below. You know, rip me apart if you want, that's fine. Let me know, you know, why you disagree with my conclusion. I'd love to hear that. I don't know, can you change my mind? I don't think you can anymore, but maybe, you never know. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I usually publish a new video every Monday morning and Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So thanks for watching, and I hope I'll talk to you soon.